EMI Group Limited, also known as EMI Music or simply EMI, was a British multinational music recording and publishing company, and electronics device and systems manufacturing company, headquartered in London, England. At the time of its breakup in 2012, it was the fourth largest business group and family of record labels in the recording industry and was one of the big four record companies. Its record labels included EMI Records, Parlophone, Virgin Records, and Capitol Records. EMI Group also had a major publishing arm, EMI Music Publishing, also based in London with offices globally. The company was once a constituent of the FTSE 100 index, but faced financial troubles and $4 billion in debt, leading to its acquisition by Citigroup in February 2011. Citigroup's ownership was temporary, as it announced in November 2011 that it would sell its music arm to Vivendi's Universal Music Group for $1.9 billion, and EMI's publishing business to a Sony ATV consortium for around $2.2 billion. Other members of the Sony consortium include the estate of Michael Jackson, Blackstone and Abu Dhabi-owned investment fund Mubadala. Both before and after the sale announcement, Universal Music Group pledged to sell off EMI assets to the value of €500 million. History. Electric and Musical Industries Limited was formed in March 1931 by the merger of the Columbia Graphophone Company and the Gramophone Company, with its His Master's Voice record label, firms that have a history extending back to the origins of recorded sound. The new vertically integrated company produced sound recordings as well as recording and playback equipment. Manufacturing. The company's gramophone manufacturing led to 40 years of success with larger-scale electronics and electrical engineering. Electronics research and development. Blumlin and Radar. Alan Blumlin, an engineer employed by EMI, conducted a great deal of pioneering research into stereo sound recording many years prior to the perfection of the medium in the early 50s. He was killed in 1942 whilst conducting flight trials on an experimental H-2S radar set. During and after the Second World War, the EMI laboratories in Hayes, Hillingdon developed radar equipment, microwave devices such as the reflex klystron oscillator, electro-optic devices such as infrared image converters, and eventually guided missiles employing analog computers. Television. Post-war, the company resumed its involvement in making broadcasting equipment, notably providing the BBC's first television transmitter. It also manufactured broadcast television cameras for British television production companies as well as for the BBC. The commercial television ITV companies also used them alongside cameras made by Pye and Marconi. Their best remembered piece of broadcast television equipment was the EMI 2001 colour television camera, which became the mainstay of much of the British television industry from the end of the 1960s until the early 1980s. Exports of this piece of equipment were low, however, and EMI left this area of product manufacture. Photomultipliers. The company was also for many years an internationally respected manufacturer of photomultipliers. This part of the business was transferred to Thorn as part of Thorn EMI, then later became the independent concern Electron Tubes Limited. Computers. In 1958 the EMI 1100, the UK's first transistorized computer, was developed at Hayes under the leadership of Godfrey Hounsfield. In the early 1970s, Hounsfield developed the first CAT scanner, a device which revolutionized medical imaging. In 1973 EMI was awarded a prestigious Queen's Award for Technological Innovation for what was then called the EMI scanner, and in 1979 Hounsfield won the Nobel Prize for his accomplishment. After brief, but brilliant, success in the medical imaging field, EMI's manufacturing activities were sold off to other companies, notably Thorn. Subsequently development and manufacturing activities were sold off to other companies and work moved to other towns such as Crawley and Wells. Emilis Electronics, based in Glenrothes, Scotland, was owned 51% by Hughes Aircraft, of California, US, and 49% by EMI. It manufactured integrated circuits electrolytic capacitors and, for a short period in the mid-1970s, handheld calculators under the Gemini name. Music. Early in its life, the Gramophone Company established subsidiary operations in a number of other countries in the British Commonwealth, including India, Australia and New Zealand. Gramophone's Australian and New Zealand subsidiaries dominated the popular music industries in those countries from the 1920s until the 1960s, when other locally owned labels began to challenge the near monopoly of EMI. Over 150,000 78 RPM recordings from around the world are held in EMI's temperature-controlled archive in Hayes, some of which have been released on CD since 2008 by Honest Jon's Records. In 1931, the year the company was formed, it opened the legendary recording studios at Abbey Road, London. During the 1930s and 1940s, its roster of artists included Arturo Toscanini, Sir Edward Elgar, and Otto Klemperer, among many others. During this time EMI appointed its first A&R managers. These included George Martin, who later brought the Beatles into the EMI fold. When the Gramophone Company merged with the Columbia Graphophone Company in 1931, the new Anglo-American group was incorporated as Electric and Musical Industries Limited. At this point RCA had a majority shareholding in the new company, giving RCA chair David Sarnoff a seat on the EMI board. However, EMI was subsequently forced to sell Columbia USA due to antitrust action taken by its American competitors. By this time the record industry had been hit hard by the Depression, and in 1934 a much diminished Columbia USA was purchased for just $70,500 by ARCBRC, which also acquired the OK label. RCA sold its stake in EMI in 1935, but due to its earlier takeover of the Victra label in 1929, RCA retained the North and South American rights to the Nipper trademark. In other countries, the dog and phonograph logo was used by the EMI subsidiary label HMV, even though the slogan itself would be retained by RCA along with the logo. In 1938 ARC Brunswick was taken over by CBS, which then sold the American Brunswick label to American Decca Records, which along with its other properties, Aeolian Records and Vocalion Records, used it as a subsidiary budget label afterward. CBS then operated Columbia as its flagship label in both the United States and Canada. EMI retained the rights to the Columbia name in most other territories including the UK, Australia and New Zealand. It continued to operate the label with moderate success until 1972, when it was retired and replaced by the EMI Records imprint, so if you see any Columbia records manufactured outside North America between 1972 and 1992, they are rare indeed. In 1990, following a series of major takeovers that saw CBS Records acquired by the Sony Corporation of Japan, EMI sold its remaining rights to the Columbia name to Sony, and the label is now operated exclusively throughout the world by Sony Music Entertainment. Except in Japan where the trademark is owned by Columbia Music Entertainment, EMI released its first LPs in 1952 and its first stereophonic recordings in 1955. In 1957, to replace the loss of its long-established licensing arrangements with RCA Victor and Columbia Records, EMI entered the American market by acquiring 96% of the stock for Capitol Records USA. From 1960 to 1995 their EMI House, corporate headquarters, was located at 20 Manchester Square, London, England, the stairwell from which was featured on the cover of the Beatles' Please Please Me album. In addition, an unused shot from the Please Please Me photo session featuring the boys in short hair and clown-cut attire, was used for the cover of the Beatles' first double-disc greatest hits compilation entitled 1962–1966. In 1969, Angus MacBean took a matching group photograph featuring the boys in long hair and beards to contrast with the earlier clown-cut image to show that the boys could have appeal across a wide range of audiences. This photo was originally intended for the Get Back album, which later was entitled Let It Be. The photo was used instead for the cover of the Beatles' second greatest hits double-disc compilation entitled 1967–1970. EMI's classical artists of the period were largely limited to the prestigious British orchestras, such as the Philharmonia Orchestra and London Symphony Orchestra. During the era of the long-playing record, very few U.S. orchestras had their principal recording contracts with EMI, one notable exception being that of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, especially during the tenure of William Steinberg. From the late 1950s to the early 1970s, the company enjoyed huge success in the popular music field under the management of Sir Joseph Lockwood. The strong combination of EMI and its subsidiary labels, along with a roster of stellar groups such as the Hollies, the Shadows, the Beach Boys, and the Beatles, along with its solo performers such as Frank Sinatra, Cliff Richard, and Nat King Cole, made EMI the best-known and most successful recording company in the world at the time. In 1967, while shifting their pop and rock music roster to Columbia and Parlophone, EMI converted HMV solely to a classical music label exclusively. For the emerging progressive rock genre, including Pink Floyd, who had debuted on Columbia, EMI established a new subsidiary label, Harvest Records, 2 years later. In 1971, Electric and Musical Industries changed its name to EMI Limited, and a year later EMI phased out most of its heritage labels and replaced the Columbia label with EMI Records imprint. 2 years later, the Gramophone Company subsidiary became EMI Records Limited as well, and in February 1979, EMI Limited acquired United Artists Records and with it their subsidiary labels Liberty Records and Imperial Records. 8 months later, Thorn Electrical Industries merged with EMI Limited to form Thorn EMI. 10 years later, in 1989, Thorn EMI bought a 50% interest in Chrysalis Records, completing the buyout 2 years later. 6 months after completing the buyout of Chrysalis, Thorn EMI bought Virgin Records from Richard Branson in one of its highest profile and most expensive acquisitions in record music history. Aftermath of demerger from Thorn. Due to the increasing divergence of business models, Thorn EMI shareholders voted in favor of demerger proposals on August 16, 1996. The resulting media company was now known as EMI Group plc. Since the 1930s, the Bork Doyle label, headquartered in Shanghai, had been published under the EMI banner, and since then, EMI had also been the dominant label in the cantopop markets in Hong Kong until the genre's decline in the mid-1980s. Between the years 2004–2006, EMI then completely and totally divested itself from the C-pop market, and after that, all Hong Kong music artists previously associated with EMI have had their music published by Gold Label, a concern unaffiliated with EMI and with which EMI does not hold any interest. On November 21, 2000, Streamwaves and EMI signed a deal licensing EMI's catalog in a digital format for their online streaming music service. This was the first time EMI had licensed any of its catalog to a streaming music website. Pop star Robbie Williams signed a 6-album deal in 2002, paying him over £80 a million, which was not only the biggest recording contract in British music history at the time, but also the second biggest in music history behind that of Michael Jackson. Apple Records, the record label representing the Beatles, launched a suit against EMI for non-payment of royalties on December 15, 2005. The suit alleged that EMI have withheld $50 a million from the record label. However, an EMI spokesman noted that audits of record label accounts are not that unusual, confirming at least 200 such audits performed on the label, but that these audits rarely result in legal action. A legal settlement was announced on April 12, 2007, and terms were undisclosed. On April 2, 2007, EMI announced it would begin releasing its music in DRM-free formats. Initially, they are rolling out in superior-sounding high bitrate AAC format via Apple's iTunes Store. Tracks will cost $1.29 a 99 pennies. Legacy tracks with Fairplay DRM will still be available for 99 cents a 79 pennies a euro, albeit with lower quality sound and DRM restrictions still in place. Users will be able to upgrade the EMI tracks that they have already bought for 30 cents a 20 pennies. Albums are also available at the same price as their lower quality DRM counterparts, and music videos from EMI will also be DRM-free. The higher quality DRM-free files became available worldwide on iTunes on May 30, 2007, and are expected to appear on other music download services as well in the near future. Since then, Universal Music Group has also announced sales of DRM-free music. In May 2006, EMI attempted to buy Warner Music Group, which would have reduced the world's 4 largest record companies to 3. However, the bid was rejected. Warner Music Group launched a Pac-Man defense, offering to buy EMI. EMI rejected the $4.6 billion offer. Terra Firma takeover. After a dramatic 7% decline in the British market share, from 16% to 9%, and the announcement that EMI had sustained a loss of £260 a million in 2006/2007, EMI was acquired by Terra Firma Capital Partners in August 2007, which purchased it for £4.2 a billion. Following the transition, several important artists including Radiohead walked away from the label, while other artists such as Paul McCartney had seen the writing on the wall and left ahead of the takeover. At the same time, the Rolling Stones signed a one-album deal with Interscope Records' Universal Music Group outside of its contract with EMI, which expired on February 2008, and then in July 2008 signed a new long-term deal with Universal Music Group. The Terra Firma takeover is also reported to have been the catalyst behind a lawsuit filed by Pink Floyd over unpaid royalties. In January 2011, Pink Floyd signed a new global agreement with EMI. Around the same time, Guy Hans, CEO of Terra Firma Capital Partners, came to EMI with restructuring plans to cut between 1,500 and 2,000 jobs and to reduce costs by £200 a million a year. As a result, the UK chief executive Tony Wadsworth left EMI after 25 years in January 2008. The cuts were planned to take effect over the year 2008, and will affect up to a third of EMI's 5,500 staff. 30 Seconds to Mars tried to exit their contract with EMI following the layoff of its staff and due to unpaid royalties, prompting the label to file a lawsuit for $30 million citing breach of contract. The suit was later settled following a defense based on a contract case involving actress Olivia de Havilland decades before. Jared Leto explained, "The California Appeals Court ruled that no service contract in California is valid after 7 years, and it became known as the de Havilland Law after she used it to get out of her contract with Warner Brothers." Many industry watchers viewed the suit as a punitive harassment meant to scare other musicians. The band's troubles with the label resonate through their third studio album This Is War and were the subject of the 2012 documentary Artifact. Another EMI singer Joss Stone battled the label, and is offered to forfeit £2 million in hopes of being released from her contract. Stone has said that after EMI was taken over by Terra Firma, her relationship with the label has gone sour and that there is no working relationship. In an interview with BBC Six Music, Ranking Cube Daiso N. Murphy clearly stated that she left the label as well because of similar disagreements. She also commented on the difficulties she had while recording her second solo album Overpowered. In 2008, EMI withdrew from the Southeast Asian market entirely, forcing its large roster of acts to search out contracts with other unaffiliated labels. As a result, the Southeast Asian market is now the only region in the world where EMI is no longer in operation, although the record label does continue to operate in Hong Kong and Indonesia. The Chinese and Taiwanese operation of EMI as well as the Hong Kong branch of Gold Label, was sold to Typhoon Group and reformed as Gold Typhoon. The Philippine branch of EMI changed its name to EMI Records, and is now a joint venture between EMI itself and Pied Piper Records Corporation. A physical audio and video products of the label have been distributed in Southeast Asia by Warner Music since December 2008, while new EMI releases in China and Taiwan were distributed under Gold Typhoon, which was previously known as EMI Music China and EMI Music Taiwan, respectively. Meanwhile, the Korean branch of EMI had its physical releases distributed by Warner Music Korea. EMI Music Japan, the Japanese EMI branch, remains unchanged from the reflection of Toshiba's divestiture to the business by EMI buying the whole branch way back July 2007, making it a full subsidiary. In July 2009, there were reports that EMI would not sell CDs to independent album retailers in a bid to cut costs, but in fact only a handful of small physical retailers were affected. Citigroup ownership. In February 2010, EMI Group reported pre-tax losses of £1.75 billion for the year ended March 2009, including write-downs on the value of its music catalogue. In addition, KPMG issued a going concern warning on the holding company's accounts regarding an ability to remain solvent. Citigroup took 100% ownership of EMI Group from Terra Firma Capital Partners on February 1, 2011, writing off a £2.2 billion of debt and reducing EMI's debt load by 65%. The group was put up for sale and final bids were due by October 5, 2011. Sony Universal sale. On November 12, 2011, it was announced that EMI would sell its recorded music operations to Universal Music Group for a £1.2 billion and its music publishing operations to Sony EMI Music Publishing for $2.2 billion. Among the other companies that had competed for the recorded music business was Warner Music Group, which was reported to have made a $2 billion bid. However, Impala has said that it would fight the merger. In March 2012, the European Union opened an investigation into Universal's purchase of EMI's recorded music division and had asked rivals and consumer groups whether the deal will result in higher prices and shut out competitors. On September 21, 2012, the sale of EMI to UMG was approved in both Europe and the United States by the European Commission and the Federal Trade Commission respectively. The European Commission approved the deal, however, under the condition that the merged company divest itself of one-third of its total operations to other companies with a proven track record in the music industry. To comply with this condition, UMG divested V2 Records, Parlophone Records, Sanctuary Records, Chrysalis Records, Mute Records, EMI Classics, Virgin Classics, and EMI's regional labels across Europe. These labels were operated separately under the name Parlophone Label Group, pending their sale. Universal would, however, retain its ownership of the Beatles library and Robbie Williams' Chrysalis recordings. Universal Music Group completed its acquisition of EMI on September 28, 2012, followed by worldwide compliance and complete rebranding by April 1, 2013. In compliance with the conditions of the European Commission, Universal Music Group sold a German-based music rights company BMG the Mute catalog, previously property of EMI, on December 22, 2012. On February 8, 2013, Warner Music Group signed an agreement to acquire Parlophone, Chrysalis Records, EMI Classics, Virgin Classics and some of EMI's regional labels across Europe for $765 million. Regulatory approval was received on May 15, 2013. Universal Music will continue to operate EMI entities it is retaining using the EMI name and has formed Virgin EMI Records as a UMG label unit in the UK. Warner Music incorporated EMI Classics and Virgin Classics into its Warner Classics unit, with the EMI Classics artist roster and catalogue absorbed into the Warner Classics label and the Virgin Classics artist roster and catalogue absorbed into the revived Erita Records label. On November 14, 2013, EMI's Middle Eastern branch was folded into Universal Music, causing the distribution of Warner Music's releases in the said region be moved to Universal Music. On June 30, 2014, Universal Music Group has re-established EMI China in Taiwan, with EMI, Rainy Yang and Shou Lerno signing first to the label. Operations, EMI Music, labels under the EMI banner. Past and present EMI musicians. EMI Music Publishing. As well as the well-known record label, the group also owned EMI Music Publishing, which was the largest music publisher in the world. EMI Music Publishing has won the Music Week Award for Publisher of the Year every year for over 10 years. In 2009, for the first time in history, the award was shared jointly with Universal Music Publishing. As is often the case in the music industry, the publishing arm and record label are very separate businesses. EMI administered the publishing rights of over 1.3 million songs, controlling the libraries of artists such as Jay-Z, Beyoncé, Dead May 5, Timo Mars, Dragon, The Prodigy, Megadeth, The Black Eyed Peas, Block Party, My Chemical Romance, Avicii, Cannibal Corpse, The Crystal Method, Quarashi, Dragpipe, Avenged Sevenfold, Slipknot, MSTRKRFT, and Sean Paul. EMI's music publishing operations were sold to a consortium led by Sony EMI Music Publishing in 2012. BMG acquired the music publishing libraries of Virgin Music and Famous Music UK. Controversy. On Internet Freedom Day, EMI evoked much controversy and anger after the removal of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech due to copyright violation. See also: Borkdoi, EMI Christian Music Group, EMI Films, EMI Records, EMI Songbook Series, EMI Televisa Music Capital Latin, List of EMI labels, List of musicians signed to EMI, List of record labels, Streamwaves, The Gramophone Company, The HMV Group, HMV, Waterstones. References. Further reading, International Directory of Company Histories, St. James Press. Joshua Awula, Mergers of Majors, Applying the Failing Firm Doctrine in the Recorded Music Industry, 7 Brook. J Corporation. Fin. and Com. L 589, 597 Euro 604. Peter Martland, Since Records Began, EMI, The First 100 Years. Batsford 1997. 359 pp. ISBN 0-7134-6207-8, external links, official website, EMI Archive, EMI Group Publishing Catalogue at Music Brains, EMI Music Publishing, EMI Sessions, History of EMI, pages of pictures of the EMI HMV websites in Hayes, Middlesex,